alcohol does play an important part of this, but actually it does feed into this. So if Ruth were here, she'd be telling you her story, and this is her story. Ruth was an athlete. By the way, her sexual assault did not happen at FSU. It happened in the Midwest, in a small college, a private small college, actually. So almost the exact opposite of the environment we have here. And I think this is important. As parents, we need to understand this, but also it's something that students that are going to school need to understand this. So she was an athlete. She was at the school on scholarship. So she was a top athlete in her state. And it was her freshman year. And she went to a party at a fraternity that the captain of her athletic team was a member of. And she went to the party. She's not a big drinker. I actually know that because I actually know her reasonably well, and I kind of know what her patterns are, and that she's not one of these people that went and just started letting loose and started partying the first time she got on campus. Believe me, I know many students have done that. Some of them ended up in these situations, but she was not that person. And she is pretty sure that she did take a beer, which, by the way, is not unexpected when kids go to fraternity, whatever the age limit is. She is pretty sure that a drug was slipped into her drink, though she can't be sure. But this is the thing, the drug was just part of it. The other part of it is that once she began to lose her sense of place, the effects of the drug, the person who assaulted her maneuvered her so that she was isolated into a room, into a bedroom. And so she was already incapacitated. And this, by the way, is going to happen if you've just been drinking too much. Lots of tables you can look at what happens to alcohol, different sizes of people and that type of thing. But here's the other part of it. The guy who raped her was visiting the school and was the brother of the captain of the athletic team. And he did not intervene to protect her. And that became a huge part of it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to say that's the typical part, but this is the kind of scenario that a lot of our students, and actually in here, there's a story in here about a woman who ended up being raped, not by one of her friends, by an acquaintance of a friend who she trusted because of the relationship that she assumed existed between her other friends. And she ended up in a situation where it was out of control. These are it's not true that every scenario like that's going to end up in an assault or a rape, but these are common types of scenarios that you can end up in. And I think as parents, we need to talk to our students about this and recognize that I raised my daughter and my son to be empowered, to know that they could control the world. And unfortunately, one of the consequences of that is they think they can't control the world, and they can't. They're going to be in situations when they can. They need to be aware of that. So that conversation is important. The other part of it, well, actually, there's so many different parts, but Corey hit on a lot of them. But there's another element to this which I think is important, and I don't know most of you in the room. I probably don't know any of you well enough to know about this, but this is another story that came from this book. And I'm pulling the story from these books, but honestly, if you read my book, I talk about most of the stories in abstractions. I've got 3 cases that have informed many of those stories that I've used, so I just didn't pull them out of anywhere. But here's one of a case where this is a woman who, it was an acquaintance of a friend who she thought that this person was just doing something nice, making sure she got home safely to her dorm room. Ended up, he was setting her up and raped her. She goes through the process. They weren't able to do anything because it was a he said, she said situation. And she found that a lot of her friends and other people would not actually stand up and say the truth in the actual hearings and actually testify for her. This, by the way, is fairly common, and that's going to go back to another point I want to raise about this. And I think it's a year or 2 later maybe, she ends up having a class with the friend of the person who raped her. So it wasn't the actual rapist who was in the class, but he didn't stand up for her. He actually believed the story of the rapist, which is common. You tend to support people in your closest friend groups before others that are less outside that circle. And but he did come up and say, "Look, I'm just going to quote this because I think it's important. It's not unique to this case. I've heard this in other stories as well." Said, "Look, can I talk to you? I want to apologize," he said, because he did not stand up for her then. I should have been more supportive of you. I shouldn't have taken his side, meaning his friend's side at that point. I should have talked to the police, but my dad didn't want me to. The project that he ended up working for was a way for him to reconnect and try and at least provide some sense of justice. I think a big part of the solution is parents holding our children accountable for when they make mistakes, but also giving them the courage to stand up when it's going to be difficult and an injustice has happened. I would like to hope that both my daughter and my son, if they saw something like this was happening, they would actually be talking to the victim advocates and others. Do I know that they can do that? I don't know, but I've heard, I mean, just again, these are stories. There's also other people that parents' first reaction is, what did you do? You know, what did you do to invite this behavior? You know, most of the time they're just being 18 and 19-year-olds. They're not doing anything to invite it. And I am now at the point where when I have someone who's being introduced to me or someone who's come in, I still have every once in a while a student will come in. The first thing I say, I believe you. I think it's really important because they cannot start the process until they have someone that's in their corner. It's very humbling when you are a faculty member at a very large urban university and you know about their assault before their parents do, because they're afraid to go to their parents. Now, part of this is that these aren't all parents that they live in fear of. It's the shame that just comes to them. They believe they're alone. They believe that they've let their parents down, and I know that my kids, they have let me down at various times. I let my parents down at various times. It is a scary thing to admit to your parents that something might have happened that they wouldn't have approved of, even when it's not your fault. And so part of this solution is creating this community that goes from family to friends and school, where when we can see trauma has happened, we're there to support the person that has experienced that trauma. Don't worry about all the other details. The question is, how do you move that? I think that's actually a really important part of the solution here, because once you start doing that, that becomes an ingrained part of the culture. Then other things begin to change within the culture. So I'm going to end here, and we're going to go to these questions. The other thing I do is I coach self-defense. I have a black belt in martial arts and a martial art that is self-defense oriented. It's actually rooted in ninjutsu, which is an offensive warrior martial art. It's been triangulated into a defensive martial art. And I didn't really understand this dynamic until I went through the process of the training itself, and then I started coaching. And here I'm going to take it a step further than where Corey went on this. It's not just about talking. Oh, I do want to reemphasize the importance of talking over and over again. I have to tell my students every semester 15 times when the paper is due before they figure it out. But this is also true because I'm big on experiential learning, because I recognize that it's not just about book learning, it's not just about telling. It has to become part of how you define how you work and operate, and that requires repetition. Because each time you accomplish a certain goal, you actually get a better understanding of what the next step is. So that's really, really important as someone who teaches and does this. It's really important. But the other part of, I think we need to do more than just educate people on bystanders. The other component of that is the bystander has to intervene. In other words, the brother of who was the captain of the athletic team should have been able to, I think he had a moral obligation to actually intervene to stop his brother from doing what he was doing. And I'm personally convinced, I can't say this as data, maybe Chris can tell me I'm wrong or not. Actually, I don't know. It'd be interesting to look at some of the fraternity and sorority relationship information that's done. But certainly my experience is that, which is anecdotal, is that if you have someone that's engaging in that kind of behavior, there are other people that know about it. So there's an element to which there has to be education and empowerment on the moral and ethical dimension. But there's the other component, which I learned through martial arts. What I found with my martial arts, both personally but as well as I started coaching, is that it's not just that martial arts protects me as an individual, that if I'm in a situation that gets out of control, I can protect myself. What it does is it empowers me as a bystander. It gives me a tool I didn't have, so that if I can intervene, I can make sure something doesn't happen or less likely is going to happen. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of self-defense, because one of the biggest, when I talk to students and I think about this stuff not just in the context of sexual assault, but all sorts of levels of intervention. What is the primary reason why we don't have more people doing the right thing? It's not because there's not an ethical or a moral sense that I don't have to. It's because I'm scared of what will happen to me if I do. And so what I've found, and I've seen this actually happen in just a few sessions, in fact, the empowerment element of the self-defense begins to create this bystander intervention approach, which can be effective on the margins, which ends up changing, has the potential, I should say, to change the entire culture. So I think it's a lot of it are these conversations. A lot of it, that empowerment. It's not just the personal empowerment, knowing I can rule the world. It's giving tools for us to know how we do that in different situations and allow those tools to be deployed in different ways. And one of the things in my martial art, what I like about it is that, one, it is designed around people that are not fit and strong and go and box in the cage. It's actually, if you're a small person, if you've gone through this training, you are actually at an advantage in the martial art that I teach and coach. And with enough training, there's virtually anybody who thinks that they can defeat you, they simply won't, simply because of the way that it is cast. But that's 5, 6, 7 years of study. That's not what we can do in a couple sessions. But I think that this bystander component is really, really important. The self-defense is important, but the self-defense is important because it also changes the bystander intervention component as part of that as well. Yes?